Now, is Putin's war shifting from, to some degree at least, from land to sea? A few hours ago, an Estonian-owned cargo ship began to sink off the coast of Ukraine in the Black Sea. Following an explosion, the ship, named the Helt, is believed to have hit a mine. 4 crew members still missing. Well, it comes after Russian amphibious assault ships, or believed to be Russian amphibious assault ships in the Black Sea, were reportedly poised for a potential attack near the seaport of Odessa. The move could open up a corridor to Kiev from the south coast. Let's turn to the former Chief of Defence Intelligence and First Sea Lord, Admiral Lord West, who joins us now. Lord West, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. What have you made of those Russian naval manoeuvres off Odessa?
Well, they've already used their amphibious capability around Mariupol in the Sea of Azov, and I think that allowed them to envelop it much more quickly. And of course, they've now effectively captured that city. And we know also that amphibious forces came out then from the Sea of Azov through the Kerch Strait into the Black Sea to join up with an amphibious group that was already there. It came from the Baltic Sea and from the Russian North Sea Fleet some 10 days or so ago. And that consists of a number of big landing craft, or Pushka-type landing craft, and other vessels. And of course, the great thing about an amphibious force is its flexibility can poise. You never know exactly where it's going to land, or is it going to land, or isn't it going to land, until it happens. But it looks very much as though they're thinking of doing a landing near to Odessa. It's a very quick way of getting a large number of troops ashore. And that does, they can land in an area where there aren't many defences. Now, they wouldn't land clearly on the city itself, but they can surround the city if necessary to do that. The Russian maritime forces are fairly significant compared with the Ukrainian ones, where they've got a very small number of ships, which is why we were going to actually help the Ukrainians build up their navy. But of course, this happened before we were able to do that. The Turks have, in fact, stopped 4 more Russian ships. I'm not sure whether they were landing ships or what they were, coming through the straits from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea, which they're allowed to do under the Treaty of Montreux, which was signed many years ago.
And as you say, you don't need to necessarily deploy the Marines, the troops to shore. The mere fact you're hovering offshore keeps in this case, the Ukrainians guessing. I mean, the ships could be empty. They may not necessarily have troops on board, but you've got to deploy defensive troops just in case they have.
Absolutely, and you don't know exactly where they're going to land. And of course, the flexibility when they're in ships is dramatically greater, because they can move at the speed of the ships, all there ready to go and poised, and they've got the air cover that they need, the Russians, in the same way as when we did amphibious operations in the Falklands, we needed the carrier air to look after it. Well, they've got air power to look after those ships, and they could land wherever they want to, but they might not have any infantrymen in them. We just don't know. But equally, they can threaten the ports on the mouth of the Dnieper. One of those is under heavy attack at the moment, or all the way along to Odessa. And Odessa is extremely important for Ukraine now, with Mariupol gone, and indeed the Kerch Strait stopped a lot of that flow of traffic. This is the main port, Odessa, for getting an awful lot of their supplies and things into the country, but also for all of their exports. And Ukraine has a massive export of wheat, which goes all over the world, and the bulk of that goes from Odessa. So it's a very important port for Ukraine.
Lord West, I think we're just going to throw up. You're going to be displaced by an image. No, I hope you don't take any offence at this. You're about to be displaced by an image of Vladimir Putin. He's speaking live in Moscow. If our viewers wonder what they're looking at, he's addressing the cameras and some of his officials in Moscow. And apologies if you're listening on radio, but that's what's happening. And as he does that, let me introduce this thought, Lord West. That is, this has been, insofar as the Russian military operation has been largely on land and air supremacy for its air force, but you know far more than most of us how there are rivalries between different arms of a military, between the tri-service rivalry in the UK, between the army, land forces, and navy and air force. Will there be a sense, you're thinking, which Vladimir Putin, there he is, will be getting calls from his chief, your equivalent in the Russian Navy, saying it's time we had a go?
Well, I think far from that. I think Putin is very pro-Navy. when he came to power, he put in place a lot of naval decrees to bring their navy up to scratch, and he's very pro. I think his father was in the Russian Navy, I think, or the Soviet Navy, and he's very pro it and has done a lot in terms of rebuilding it post the collapse after the Soviet Union. They've had a number of new build programs. They're building new nuclear submarines. They're building some really quite impressive surface ships, carrying quite impressive weapons. But I'm sure the naval commanders are saying, look, we've got this capability. Do you want to use us or not use us? And that they have that huge flexibility. The whole reason that, for over centuries, Russia fought against the Ottoman Empire to get land on the Black Sea. The old musical song of Ivan Skavinsky Sklavar and Abdul-Buldamir. That's why they captured the Crimea. They wanted to have a port which had access down to the south, and the Soviet Union used this to be able to get out into the Mediterranean during the Cold War. It's why they have a base at Tartus in Syria with a link to Syria. That's why Syria was important to them. And having that base on the Black Sea has always been very important in terms of Russian strategy. And there's no doubt that Sevastopol was the big, large Russian naval port in the south. And that's where the bulk of the ships are. And the Ukrainian Navy, even when the Ukraine took it over, had very small number of ships there. And the Russians still had a lot. There was an agreement that the Russians were allowed to leave their Black Sea fleet there, even when Crimea was owned by Ukraine. So it is quite complex, but very, very important to them. There's a lovely bit from that poem about Ivan Skavinsky, where it says at the end of it, sorry, you want to listen to Putin, or you have?
No, we don't. I mean, somebody just faded up his. Yeah.
Where he said, "A Muscovite maiden her lone vigil keeps, neath the light of the cold northern star, and the name that she murmurs in vain as she weeps is Ivan Skavinsky Skavar." That was losing people and Russians there then, and I think we're seeing them still losing people, and there'll be Muscovite maidens weeping, I think.
Lord West, we're just going to, apologies to people listening on radio, we'll show some pictures showing this Bangladeshi flagged freighter, smoke guttering from its bridge. We're not entirely sure what caused this. A missile was one suggestion, another vessel sinking, having perhaps been hit by a mine. There's a sense in which some of the sea lanes off that southern Ukrainian coastline, Lord West, are in play militarily. Just a thought in terms of defence spending. It's dawning on people, I think, over the last week that we're entering a new phase. Maybe it's Cold War 2.0. Certainly, German rearmament is back on the agenda. $100 billion of defence spending they're planning. The Royal Navy's had a sort of good 10 years when it comes to defence spending, 2 new aircraft carriers, and a sense that after Afghanistan and Iraq, the lion's share, or more spending, would go towards our naval resources than had been the case. Are you concerned perhaps now, concern is probably the wrong word, but do you think now there'll be a reassessment of that? We'll be spending more money on ground forces again, or do you think actually a rising tide lifts all boats and there will just be more defence spending across the piece?
Well, I think just to unpick all of that, I've been very worried since the coalition's defence review of 2010, which cut our military capability by a third, that we have not been spending enough on defence. And although there have been little bits added, and the last spending review where the Conservative government did add some more money back, but it wasn't nearly enough to make up for the cuts there'd been. And as you rightly say, during the period we were fighting, I think, rather useless nation-building wars in Central and South West Asia, in Afghanistan and Iraq, which I think were all a bit of a disaster. The huge amounts of money went to the army and indeed also the Air Force, and the Navy was cut to the bone. Now, with our sort of withdrawal from those with our tail between our legs, effectively, only in these recent years, we've now, this government in the last 2.5, 3 years have said that we need a maritime strategy, which we do. We're an island, and we forget that sometimes. Yeah. The 2 carriers we managed to fight through at great cost and difficulty because of the other pressures on the naval program. And so there we thought we were going to start getting new build. But we're not getting the money to build these things quickly. And what I would say is the army was cut too much. I've said that a number of times. We need more money for defence. And I've, over the last 2 weeks, have been standing up in the House and saying, we're doing all these things like sanctions and all this stuff. Why has the government not said, there is a war going on in Europe, and it might get a bigger war. Normally, when there's a war, you spend money on defence. But there's been not a word about putting money in defence to make up for the shortfalls that there are in defence. There are critical shortages in terms of weapon stocks. The ships that are necessary are not being built quickly enough. The army tanks and its combat vehicles, many of them have not been upgraded and things like that. Now, there should be money going to that now. And looking to the future, I think it would be madness in this very dangerous world not to maybe look at 3% of GDP to be spent on defence. And that's what happens
Lord West,
when there are wars.